Welcome, everyone, to another session of the Cooperation Tulsa Organizer Education Program. Today, we're going to be continuing our reading of Full Spectrum Resistance, Volume 1. We're going to get the stream started by having everybody count off the order that they're going to be reading. So, just want to remind everyone who is watching on live stream, if you would like to be part of the reading group, if you'd like to actually be one of the people reading and being part of the discussion, all you have to do is go over to our Open Collective, go to the Cooperation Tulsa Open Collective, and become a recurring donor for any amount. Also, anything that you donate on stream, on the Anark stream during this reading, will be donated directly to Cooperation Tulsa. So just thought I would make all of that clear before we get started. Some links would be good. Let me see if I can get that Open Collective one at all minimum. Boom. And there's the Open Collective link. Boom. Also looks like there's a new member. It doesn't tell me which channel it's a new member of, but welcome, Collage. Good to see you here. Oh, it's probably the Anark. It's the Anark one because we don't have membership set up. Oh, boom. Now it should be coming through. So people should be able to hear you.
I didn't hear anything at first, so let me try again, just talking. Blah, blah.
Pretty sure it should be working.
Oh, yep.
Cool.
Yeah, just heard me.
You just heard you.
I just heard me.
That makes sense. So which session is this? This is not session 6. I accidentally put the wrong session number up there. Let me see if I can fix it. Session 7 is what this is. And that one also has the wrong session. There we go. Save changes. Boom. Boom. All right. I think we basically got it ready to go. So let's find where we were last time. Let's check in the channel. I think it's with the force of the movement lost. I think that's what the passage we put down was. There we go. So, all right. So here, this was, I think, us talking about the unions becoming absorbed by the social democratic reforms of the FDR era. So I'll just get us started on the previous paragraph because we kind of stopped in the middle of reading right there. So simultaneously, the relief system was changed to make it less vulnerable to grassroots pressure. Formalized grievance processes were set up to try to discourage the militant delegations and office occupations. Chicago created a single grievance office, and national liberal organizations, in conjunction with co-opted local leaders, diverted community anger into a bureaucratic sinkhole. The introduction of a centralized grievance office stripped the Chicago unemployed groups of their main weapon against the relief centers. As a result, their membership declined and internal dissension among the groups increased. There again is the horizontal hostility that divides and disrupts movements when they are unable to be effective. And so the militant anti-poverty movements declined. Quote, what leverage these groups had exerted on local relief officials resulted from the very disturbances, the pressure tactics, which both leaders and administrators later scorned as primitive. Victories in obtaining relief had been won by mobilizing people for abrasive demonstrations and by demanding benefits on the spot for hundreds of people. By abandoning disruptive tactics in favor of bureaucratic procedures, the movement lost the ability to influence relief decisions in the local offices. And then now we're finally caught up again. With the force of the movement lost, with its local leaders engaged in bureaucratic minuets, and with its national leaders concentrating on legislative reform through the electoral system, Relief officials soon regained control over the relief centers, and the national administration regained control of relief policy. Relief payments decreased, the demonization of the poor in the media increased, and defiance dwindled. The effect was felt directly by poor families and workers, in terrible housing, in empty bellies, in worn-out shoes, and by incarceration in workhouses for debtors. I'm not opposed to formal organization or to building popular consensus or to gaining the sympathies of new supporters. Indeed, good organization magnifies the impact of militancy. But if movement chooses formality at the cost of disruptiveness, it has lost its main avenue for material success. The ability to inspire and demonstrate defiance is a key part of any resistance movement. Stan Goff, activist, author, and veteran, writes, quote, "Rock throwing is the ultimate asymmetric warfare. It erases all the markers of combatants that formalize warfare. It is completely democratic. It is a first step across an invisible line between obedience and resistance, across the boundary of the taboo against physical resistance. It is agile. It provokes, then moves. It requires no technology." He argues that, end quote. He argues that those on the left, quote, "will be transformed into leaders when we learn the lessons of rocks," end quote. Imagine two movements. One is well organized but uses a non-confrontational tactical monoculture. The second is a loosely organized but disruptive movement that sometimes destroys property. If we must choose between the two movements, history suggests that the second type will be more effective. Which is to say, for marginalized groups, militancy without organization is often more effective than organization without militancy. But there's a third way. We can build movements that prioritize solidarity and a diversity of tactics while simultaneously building and critiquing our own strategy. Good organization can make a bit of militancy go far. Many of the effective movements discussed in this book, including the Deacons for Defense, the United Farm Workers, and ACT UP, were able to strike that balance. The key is to build organizational structures that are supportive rather than rigid, and that keep leaders accountable and responsive. This is something we'll come back to in more depth in Chapter 5, Groups and Organizations. Tactical harmony won't be reached by suppressing militant tactics in favor of the lowest common denominator. Instead, we must try to develop real strategies together to support each other and to encourage militancy that matches our situation. Next.
Movement building. You scroll up, please. Divide and conquer is the basic operating principle of any empire. The success of struggles for justice against poverty, colonialism, racism, sexism, and so on depend heavily on our ability to overcome this very old strategy. When the imperial powers of Europe wanted to colonize the indigenous continents they called Australia and North America, they flooded these continents with poor white people. Those people were poor because they were exploited by the powerful, and they were criminalized for their poverty, like those sent to Australia for stealing a loaf of bread. In theory, the European elites were the class enemy of both the indigenous and the poor white people, but aristocrats were usually able to pit indigenous people and poor Europeans against each other. They were sometimes successful at pitting different indigenous groups against each other, though oppressed groups occasionally joined together, like the Maroons, groups of escaped slaves and indigenous people in the Caribbean and the South. Just prior to World War I, revolutionary spirit surged through Europe and North America, a spirit that was partly quenched when the working classes of various countries slaughtered each other in the trenches. Radical working class organizing outside the war was perpetually stymied by the ability of the bosses to pit workers of different ethnic and national origins against each other. Consider this report from a visitor to a Chicago employment office in 1904. Quote, "I saw, seated on benches around the office, a sturdy group of blonde-haired Nordics. I asked the employment agent How comes it you are employing only Swedes? He answered, well, you see, it is only for this week. Last week we employed Slovaks. We change about among different nationalities and languages. It prevents them from getting together. We have the thing systematized. End quote. Much later, as the civil rights struggle grew, it was often those whites on the bottom of the hierarchy who lashed out most violently against Black people. It was they who felt most threatened by the rising social status of Black people. Although the leadership of the KKK in the South overlapped heavily with the leadership of the white civil society, police officers, church officials, politicians, those on the bottom served as foot soldiers. Radical social movements have been torn apart by deep schism even without outside manipulation. Far too many movements in history have been, for example, systematically sexist. The Black Panthers were disrupted by COINTELPRO, but internal attitudes against women, allowing abuse and rape, may have been even more damaging. In her gripping book, A Taste of Power, Black Panther Ellen Brown tells how Huey Newton ordered the severe beating of a woman named Regina Davis. Davis ran the BPP Liberation School and had verbally criticized a male comrade, quote unquote, for refusing to do a task he had been assigned. Ellen Brown wrote, quote, a woman in the Black Power movement was considered, at best, irrelevant. A woman asserting herself was a pariah. A woman attempting the role of leadership was, to my proud Black brothers, making an alliance with the counter-revolutionary, men-hating, lesbian, feminist white bitches. Quote, quote. It was a violation of some Black Power principle that was left undefined. If a Black woman assumed a role of leadership, she was said to be eroding Black manhood, to be hindering the progress of the Black race. She was an enemy of Black people. End quote. Next.
Black Panther Ashanti Omowale Alston adds, quote, COINTELPRO didn't destroy the BPP. It merely capped on our own weaknesses that we couldn't or didn't have the understandings and tools to transform at the time. Racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, impatience. Of course, the BPP was far from the only sexist movement of the 1960s. Sexism is an attitude that transcends racial boundaries. Nor have feminist movements been free of racism or classism, of course, and nor have labor movements been free of sexism or racism. I'm not going to catalog such overlapping oppressions here. Other people have written more comprehensively and more eloquently than I about the intersections of race, class, and gender, and how their effective navigation can make or break struggles for liberation. I simply want to make a point that I hope has become more obvious than it was during the 1960s. No movement can bring about a liberated future if that organization will not combat oppressive attitudes. Those oppressive attitudes may be sexism, racism, classism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, ageism, or something else. But a movement cannot wage political conflict effectively if it is too busy abusing or denigrating its own people and its closest allies. Nor can such a movement make intelligent strategy or good decisions. It's utterly foolish and destructive for any marginalized movement to, for example, exclude or suppress the participation of women through sexism. What movement can win by getting rid of 51% of its potential membership? And no group can win by ignoring skill in favor of privilege. When a woman who is a brilliant strategist is ignored because a louder but less talented man is dominating the group, that group loses the benefits of her talents. And it's not just a matter of failing to bring out the abilities of people who happen to be women. Those who are oppressed by power often have a better understanding of how power works and how to fight it than those who are privileged by power. The case of the United Farm Workers in Chapter 12 shows how groups with less privilege may be smarter strategically. It's extremely important, for both moral and strategic reasons, to work to wipe out sexism and racism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia in all of our movements. Some movements have consciously tried to overcome the divide and conquer tactics of power. Such alliances surely go back to the dawn of empire. The Green Corn Rebellion, an Oklahoma-based uprising of 1917, is a good example. The rebellion emerged from rural discontent with long-term economic exploitation and mistreatment, exacerbated by the beginning of World War I and the military draft. The uprising was carried out by a coalition of poor rural people, including tenant farmers, Black people, white people, and indigenous people, including Seminoles and Muskogee Creeks. The Green Corn Rebellion had an unapologetically land-based character, and many of the rebels saw townspeople as part of the same exploiter class as financial magnates like J.P. Morgan. That exploiter class was responsible for variously taking the land of the indigenous rebels and committing genocide against them, for enslaving the people of the Black rebels, and for economically exploiting the entire group through astronomically high rent and usury. The exploiter class stole their crops, and now through the draft, it wanted to steal their sons. The Green Corn Rebels were brought together by their common ties to the land and by their understanding that the war abroad was being waged for the capitalists and imperialists at the expense of their class. One of their manifestos read, quote, "Now is the time to rebel against this war with Germany, boys. Boys, get together and don't go. Rich man's war, poor man's fight. The war is over with Germany if you don't go, and J.P. Morgan and Co. is lost. Their great speculation is the only cause of the war." End quote. Next.
The uprising began with the cutting of telegraph lines and the burning of railway bridges. Their plan, somewhat naively, was to march east towards Washington, D.C., eating roasted green corn and beef for sustenance as they traveled. Their intended food source was also the origin of their name. They would join up with other rebellious rural folk as they went, and when the mass arrived at the White House, my brain is not working. Hold on. And when the mass arrived at the White House, they would end their war by kicking out President Wilson, who had just lied his way into re-election by claiming he would keep America out of the war. But the rebels were betrayed. Just backing up, they're talking about World War I. Is that right?
Yeah, World War I was President Wilson, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. All right. Just making sure. But the rebels were betrayed by an informer, and a posse of well-armed townspeople attacked them as their march began. The campaign promptly disintegrated, and in the aftermath, the uprising was used as an excuse for the government to crack down on both the Socialist Party and the Wobblies, who weren't even involved. Those in power will use any excuse for repression, regardless of whether that excuse is based in fact. With such ambitious goals and such a confrontational attitude, but with a lack of security culture and strategic planning, it is perhaps no surprise that the Green Corn Rebellion did not succeed. Confrontation is important, but resistance movements also need to build up their other skills and capacities, including security, strategy, and logistics, so that they can win battles and sustain struggle. Many historical movements consciously limited their short-term goals to build whatever unity they could and to give themselves time to develop capacity and grow. The civil rights movement targeted segregation because they could maximize their support while minimizing repression. Many civil rights organizers understood that ending segregation alone would not secure economic justice, but they hoped to maximize their support and to avoid being called communists by emphasizing their own patriotism and avoiding calls to redistribute wealth or later to end the war in Vietnam. The late 60s, after some legislative victories had been won, this changed. What? Oh, late in the 1960s, after some legislative victories had been won, this changed. Martin Luther King Jr. called his friends and ominously asked them to join his, quote, final campaign. He publicly condemned the war in Vietnam, which he had previously avoided to prevent potential conflicts with supporters. He took poverty as his new enemy and blamed the war for diverting money that could end poverty. The new movement, the Poor People's Campaign, intended to use massive civil disobedience to force the end of the war in Vietnam, freeing up billions of dollars to abolish poverty, while also winning an economic bill of rights for all citizens. King worked to form an alliance of people from all races and backgrounds united in this common goal. It was an ambitious goal, and one that many civil rights supporters did not share. When King came out against the war, his own organization, it's interesting, they're kind of touching on like the like optics, like the focus of optics. It was an ambitious goal and one that many civil rights supporters did not share. When King came out against the war, his own organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, rejected him. The Northerners, who had felt morally superior watching Southern bigots on television, were not comfortable being confronted with problems for which they were culpable. The Johnson administration didn't want King to cause trouble for the Democrats then in power, and to see poor people of different ethnicities and to see poor people of different ethnicities organizing together and doing it militantly terrified capitalists as well. Next.
King knew that he was taking on a difficult campaign that was unlikely to win. He also knew that there would be reprisals for going after such powerful interests. He appointed a whole new batch of officials for redundancy in case of assassinations. King himself had difficulty coping. Colleagues reported hearing him through hotel room walls late at night, drinking and yelling, "I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go back to my little church." On April 4th, 1968, before the Poor People's Campaign really got underway, King was assassinated in Memphis while assisting a sanitation workers' strike. The Poor People's Campaign, under attack and without substantial backing, did not achieve any decisive victories. But participation in the campaign and its march on Washington had a real effect on tens of thousands of people. It gave them a taste of a broad coalition and gave them experience in organizing across ethnic lines. As one historian explains, quote, "Whether they went for months, weeks, or just a day or two, many marchers left Washington enlightened, if not transformed," end quote. While the Poor People's Campaign was taking place, a grassroots movement was being built in Chicago. The Rainbow Coalition was a movement that united people from many different backgrounds and ethnicities to fight poverty and attacks by the police. It was young Black Panther Fred Hampton, already an incredible speaker and organizer in his late teens, who gave the coalition its name. And Hampton's fellow activist Bobby Lee did much of the organizing. The Pan-Ethnic Coalition included a gamut of groups, from leftist organizations to street gangs, from the Puerto Rican Young Lords to the Black Panthers to the Students for a Democratic Society. They stopped fighting each other and united on the common basis of militant anti-poverty organizing. Bobby Lee explains, "The Rainbow Coalition was just a code word for class struggle." End quote. The Rainbow Coalition was frightening to those in power because it overcame ethnic divisions. Bobby Lee explains, quote, Fred Hampton got the idea of the Rainbow Coalition right away. He had been involved with the NAACP as a youth, so he already had worked with white people, knew they weren't all bad. It seems to me that a lot of the real intense government repression didn't happen until the Black Panthers started building coalitions. Once the party departed from the hate whitey trip and got serious about building real politics, we were a threat, plain and simple. The FBI were always watching us, but the Rainbow Coalition was their worst nightmare, end quote. COINTELPRO responded with an FBI-orchestrated attack. One night in December 1969, a police infiltrator who had been acting as Fred Hampton's bodyguard slipped Hampton a sedative. A police team burst through the apartment door a few hours later and shot another Panther in the apartment before proceeding to Hampton's bedroom using a map given to them by their infiltrator. They fired nearly 100 rounds into the bedroom as Hampton's pregnant girlfriend lay beside him. They approached the bed a moment later and shot Hampton directly in the head. With the help of the media, the police spun a fantastic story about a shootout initiated by Hampton and the Panthers, but Hampton, drugged by police, never even woke up during the attack. Hampton was 21 years old. The mantle of the Rainbow Coalition, or the basic ideas behind it, would be carried by many other organizers in other places and times. One of those people was Judy Berry, an environmentalist and labor organizer who worked in Northern California through the 1980s and 90s. Berry was a factory worker, trade unionist, and carpenter who joined Earth First and created a synthesis of radical left and environmental thought that would win important victories on both fronts. Next.
I'll talk about her organizing work in a moment, but first I want to touch on the philosophy that guided her work, which she explained in her essay, Revolutionary Ecology. Judy Berry bemoaned the schism between social ecologists and deep ecologists, between radical environmentalists and social justice activists, and even between forest defenders and timber workers. She wrote, quote, "Starting from the very reasonable but unfortunately revolutionary concept that social practices which threaten the continuation of life on Earth must be changed, we need a theory of revolutionary ecology that will encompass social and biological issues, class struggle, and a recognition of the role of global corporate capitalism in the oppression of peoples and the destruction of nature. I believe we already have such a theory. It's called deep ecology, and it is the core belief of the radical environmental movement. The problem is that in the early stages of this debate, deep ecology was falsely associated with such right-wing notions as sealing the borders, applauding AIDS as a population control mechanism, and encouraging Ethiopians to starve. This sent the social ecologists justifiably scurrying to dissociate. And I believe it has muddled the waters of our movement's attempt to define itself behind a common philosophy." End quote. Calling herself an unabashed leftist, Berry went on to explain why deep ecology is a revolutionary worldview in contradiction to capitalism, communism, and patriarchy. She rooted this argument in biocentrism, the belief that nature does not exist to serve humans. Rather, humans are part of nature, one species among many. All species have a right to exist for their own sake, regardless of their usefulness to humans. And biodiversity is a value in itself, essential for the flourishing of both human and non-human life. End quote. Berry fused radical labor analysis with radical ecology. Anyone exposed to Karl Marx will know his basic take on profit, that profit is stolen from the workers when capitalists pay them less than the value of their labor. Berry argued that the same principle of theft applies to ecology, and that profit depends on capitalists taking more from the land than they give back. Although it's admirable that Marxism and other traditional leftist ideologies believe in equally distributing wealth, Berry wrote such an approach is a dead end if it fails to recognize that the exploitation of the earth is where most of that wealth comes from. As such, Berry believed that, quote, if workers really had control of the factories, and I say this as a former factory worker, they should start by smashing the machines and finding a more humane way to decide what we need and how to produce it, end quote. In Judy Berry's eyes, the two greatest shortcomings in traditional Marxism were its failure to address ecology and its failure to address patriarchy. Like the other solidarity-building revolutionary groups have been discussing, Earth First was targeted and attacked by the FBI. Quote, the fact that we did not recognize deep ecology as revolutionary is one of the reasons we were so unprepared for the magnitude of the attack, end quote. Writing in 1995, Berry argued, quote, if we are to continue Earth First and the entire ecology movement must adjust their tactics.
Sorry, the cat just stepped on the keyboard. I have to find Is this where we
That's
at?
it. Blame the cat.
Where is this where we
Um,
were?
I think it's above that.
No, maybe
Just
it's
a
up
little further.
above. Oh, it's
Okay,
below?
here. Yeah, no. Higher. Yeah, there. The bottom of the page. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
You silly kitty.
Um, Writing in 1995, Barry argued, quote, "If we are to continue Earth first, and the entire ecology movement must adjust their tactics to the profound changes that are needed to bring society into balance with nature," end quote. They must become, in other words, a real resistance movement and connect with revolutionary allies. She wrote, quote, "You cannot seriously address the destruction of wilderness without addressing the society that is destroying it. It's about time for the ecology movement, and I'm not just talking about Earth First here, to stop considering itself as separate from the social justice movement. The same power that manifests itself as resource extraction in the countryside manifests itself as racism, classism, and human exploitation in the city. The ecology movement must recognize that we are just one front in a long, proud history of resistance. A revolutionary ecology movement must also organize among poor and working people. With the exception of the Toxics movement and the Native Land Rights movement, most US environmentalists are white and privileged. This group is too invested in the system to pose it much of a threat. A revolutionary ideology in the hands of privileged people can indeed bring about some disruption and change in the system. But a revolutionary ideology in the hands of working people can bring that system to a halt. For it is the working people who have their hands on the machinery, and only by stopping the machinery of destruction can we ever hope to stop this madness. Next.
These arguments here are well rooted in history. Giving MOVE and the United Farm Workers as examples, authors Stephen Best and Anthony J. Nacella argue that many of the grassroots environmental organizations of the 70s and 80s, quote, were organized by women, people of color, and community members to fight corporate pollution and exploitation. With no patrons, politicians, or corporate sponsors to answer to or offend, grassroots groups such as that spearheaded by Lois Gibbs to protest the 20,000 tons of chemical waste that sickened her community of Love Canal, New York, adopted a confrontational, no compromise approach, and won battles the professionalized mainstream would or could not fight, end quote. I'll return to the United Farm Workers in Chapter 12, Campaigns and Strategy. Judy Berry argued eloquently in her writings for a synthesis of deep ecology, socialism, and feminism, but her arguments through action were even more persuasive. In organizing the 1990 Redwood Summer, a campaign explicitly modeled after the civil rights campaign Mississippi Summer, discussed in Chapter 4, Berry and her colleagues reached out to unite workers, environmentalists, and community members against the common enemy of logging corporations like Maxam and Pacific Lumber. As a labor organizer, she tried to make forest workers understand that by cooperating with massive clear cuts and destructive logging, they were sacrificing their children's future livelihoods to make lumber barons rich. And as a radical environmentalist, she tried to convince Earth First organizers to undertake serious, long-term community organizing. Berry believed that the very masculine approach of early Earth First, its primary practice being a handful of brave men going out to confront ecocide alone, would not attain victory in the long term. She wanted to see community actions that used a diversity of nonviolent tactics while simultaneously advancing what she saw as feminist forms of environmental direct action. Berry wrote, quote, Redwood Summer was the feminization of Earth First, with 3/4 of the leadership made up of women. Our past actions in the Redwood region had drawn no more than 150 participants, but 3,000 people came to Redwood Summer, blocking logging operations and marching through timber towns in demonstrations reminiscent of those against racism in the South. And despite incredible tension and provocation, Earth First maintained both our presence and our nonviolence throughout the summer. Being the first women-led action, Redwood Summer has never gotten the respect it deserves from the old guard of Earth First, but it has profoundly affected the movement in the Redwood region. It brought national and international attention to the slaughter of the redwoods. The 2,000-year-old trees of Headwaters Forest, identified, named, and made an issue of by Earth First, are now being preserved largely due to our actions. The legacy of our principled and nonviolent stand in Redwood Summer has gained us respect in our communities and allowed us to continue and build our local movement. End quote. The effective organizing of Redwood Summer made it a threat even before it succeeded. In May of 1990, Judy Berry and her organizing partner Daryl Cherney were car bombed and severely injured. The car bomb was placed directly underneath Berry's seat, and she struggled with serious health problems until she died in 2002. Everything we know suggests that the bombing took place with the direct involvement of the FBI, a story I'll come back to in Chapter 9, Counterintelligence and Repression. Building coalitions makes you dangerous. It is no coincidence that many of the people I cited in this passage were killed. I don't want you to take away the message that building bridges between movements will get you put in prison, drugged, shot, or blown up, but being effective brings down repression. You can judge how much those in power are afraid of real coalitions by how violently they repress them. Next.
Such alliances are rare, which is exactly why we have to nurture and protect them when they do arise. Among young and enthusiastic moderates, I sometimes see well-meaning but naive, quote, "Can't we all just get along?" attitude that ignores both the complicated and hazardous nature of power dynamics in a genuinely diverse movement and the vicious attacks such a movement will face even when it is working smoothly. And among radicals, I too often see a contempt towards organizing with others that makes militants easy to isolate and pick off. Building diverse coalitions requires the difficult and time-consuming work of finding or building common ground. It requires more socially powerful members of the coalition to take stock of their privilege and rid themselves of destructive behavior patterns. It requires that space be deliberately made for people who are underrepresented in decision making. And it requires that coalitions organize like resistance movements to build the necessary security, strategy, and counterintelligence that will allow them to survive and thrive. I'll come back to coalitions in Chapter 12. Can you scroll up? Thank you. An intersectional approach can help us greatly. Intersectionality, a term coined by civil rights advocate and scholar Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, is not just a way of understanding how different kinds of oppression can overlap and reinforce each other. It's also a way of understanding how different marginalized groups can understand common oppressions and find common ground. In the 1980s in the UK, coal miners went on a years-long strike as part of a prolonged battle between the miners and Margaret Thatcher's anti-union policies. At the same time as those strikes were dragging on and coal mining communities falling into poverty and deprivation, queer organizers were struggling for status and recognition for LGBTQ+ people. In 1984, a young gay and communist organizer in London named Mark Ashton saw a connection between the police beatings of striking miners and of queer people. He saw a common enemy, as he explained to his comrades, quote, "Mining communities are being bullied like we are, being harassed by the police just as we are. One community should give solidarity to another," end quote. Ashton and his comrades formed a group called Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. Together, they canvassed the streets of London and held events to raise money for the striking miners. They assembled shipments of food, money, and supplies. When they reached out to mining communities as a group of lesbians and gays, the response from the miners was at first mixed. Indeed, those in power did their best to drive the two movements apart. Rupert Murdoch's paper, The Sun, published a front page story with the headline, quote, "Pits and Perverts," referencing the coal mining pits. Okay. These divide and rule attempts could have worked, but in this case, divide and conquer failed because both queer organizers and people in the mining community worked tirelessly to build bridges between the movements. And they were able to overcome stereotypes and homophobic bias through working side by side. These events were later dramatized in the 2014 film Pride, which is well worth watching. At a huge fundraising concert in London, a mining organizer addressed the mostly queer audience of 1,500 people, quote, "You know what harassment means, as we do. Now we will pin your badge on us. We will support you. It won't change overnight, but now 140,000 miners know that there are other causes and other problems. We know about Blacks and gays and nuclear disarmament, and will never be the same," end quote. The striking miners did not have the decisive win they hoped for, but when the time came for miners to return the gesture of solidarity, if they followed through on their promise. They sent busloads and busloads of miners to march in gay pride parades. They endorsed gay and lesbian equality and pushed resolutions through the Labor Party. And together they won. Within a matter of years, they won huge legal gains for gay and lesbian people and created a cross-movement solidarity that the government and the right-wing media could not break. Next.
A tug of war. Judy Berry is inspiring, and the Wobblies' idea of one big union is powerful. But in the short term, I see little hope of uniting all of those seeking social and ecological justice into a single organization. When there is a clear, common enemy and immediate threat, coalitions are easier to hold together. But once the immediate threat has passed, the coalition often collapses, and underlying arguments reemerge. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes common ground is built along the way, especially when there are people with experience and well-rounded analysis. Indeed, such bridge builders are key ingredients for successful coalitions, as I'll come back to in Chapter 12. But attempts to form a unified organization so often break down over arguments of priority and tactics. Given the profound difficulty of forming unified organizations and the strongly unified forces of empire and capitalism arrayed against us, how can we build diverse movements that exert force instead of squabbling internally? One way is to think of struggle like a tug of war. To win, we don't have to be in the same organization, but we have to be on the same side, pulling in the same general direction. At the very least, we should not be pulling against each other. And when an opportunity to make actual progress arises, we have to be coordinated enough to heave all together and jerk the opposing side down on their faces. Rather than a rope, we pull with a chain. Each link on that chain is an organization or a group or an affiliation. Not everyone on the chain has to agree with each other or even like each other, but if there's enough to overlap, enough cross-linkages in the movement, we can still pull very hard in the same general direction despite those differences. Those in power are pulling very hard in one direction, toward the concentration of power, toward war, toward the stripping of the land for the sake of short-term production and profit, and they have been doing this for a long time. They have used the blunt baton of the police, the promise of wealth, and many sedating ideologies. The end point is what it always has been, an authoritarian future on a ruined and dying planet. Let's just keep things simple and call it a fascist dystopia. So here we have a diagram of the tug of war. And on one side, we have the livable future, and we have a guy with a construction hat and a farmer, and looks like probably just a protester. And on the other side, we have the police and the capitalists and somebody with a pope hat. So I guess institutional religion. On the other side are those pulling for a livable future, or rather diverse futures. They are the counterforce to those in power, and there have been times, like the Poor People's Campaign or the Green Corn Rebellion, when farmers and workers and indigenous people and the poor have been all heaving together. The goal of programs like COINTELPRO have been to cut the chain, to break those links, and at the same time as they have weakened our side, they have strengthened theirs with a growing industrial economy that pillages the planet while generating both the bribes of cheap consumer goods and the weapons of modern-day warfare. The forces for justice have become divided and distracted. Meanwhile, those in power have terrible new technologies to aid their rule. I guess I'll just finish this page because it has such a big diagram on it. So here we just have the links of the chains are breaking on the left, and then on the right, they have like a tank helping them basically. Our job is to rebuild our links by taking action together, to build organizations and coalitions that can connect people, to build strong links we can use to change the course of our future, to build solidarity and cooperation. Next.
Then there's the figure that's basically showing with solidarity and cooperation, the links can be broken on the fascist dystopian side. At the same time, we must break up the systems that allow those in power to exert force. We must do our best to sever the physical, economic, and political links that put them in control. Some of those are social and psychological, but many are physical infrastructure. We need both kinds of action, cooperation and disruption, to win a livable future. Practicalities of full spectrum resistance. For clarity, let me summarize the argument I've been making in this chapter. A movement using full spectrum resistance will do the following. First bullet point, use of diversity of tactics, especially within campaigns and movements. Build an understanding of how and why militancy is important, and cultivate cooperation among people using different tactics. Second, develop cooperation among different constituencies and across traditional barriers, including ethnic lines, militants and moderates, above ground and underground, including through alliances and coalitions. 3, uphold solidarity. 4, use intersectionality and synthesis of ideas from different struggles for justice, like revolutionary ecology. Above all, full spectrum resistance means countering the divide and conquer tactics used by those in power. These things look simple on the page. In practical terms, they are extremely difficult, and they run counter to many activist subcultures and identities. There are, however, some straightforward habits that can help us to build full spectrum resistance and encourage everyone to get along. First habit, don't tell other people to slow down, especially if they are more directly affected by a problem than you. It's okay if you don't want to use confrontational tactics, but don't tell other people not to use tactics just because you are unable or unwilling to use them yourself. Martin Luther King Jr. argued that people who break this rule were basically worse than the KKK. Quote, apart from bigots and backlashers, it seems to be a malady even among those whites who like to regard themselves as enlightened. Sorry. I would especially refer to those who counsel wait, and to those who say that they sympathize with our goals but cannot condone our methods of direct action pursuit of those goals. I wonder at men who dare to feel that they have some paternalistic right to set the timetable for another man's liberation. Over the past several years, I must say, I have been gravely disappointed with such white moderates. I am often inclined to think that they are more of a stumbling block to the Negro's progress than the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner. End quote. You can have strategic dialogue with allies without telling them to dilute their tactics. But if that dialogue is going to be meaningful, it can't be paternalistic and it can't be based on thin excuses for inaction. I suggest it is better to encourage action you like with your allies by supporting or participating in it, rather than suppressing or discouraging the action of other people. Resistance movements are only able to escalate when people encourage, literally put heart into, other people to take on more militancy and commitment. Closely related advice. Next.
Respect the autonomy of other groups. If one of your movement allies is already running a campaign or an action, don't just barge in and take over or flagrantly violate their rules of engagement. I know a militant group in a big city that was recently working to organize a big rally while inviting labor union involvement. Labor hemmed and hawed for a while and then announced that they would, by complete coincidence, be holding their own rally at the same time and at the same location. They would be bringing a very large crowd and their elaborate sound system, but if the militant group wanted to have a couple of guest speakers, that would be fine if the union approved them in advance. Do I really need to say that that's not okay? Conflict is more likely to arise when a pre-existing claim is not clear-cut. A few years ago, I went to a protest against a fundraiser for the ruling Conservative Party. A government minister would be speaking. A number of different groups showed up to protest. Some of the radicals wanted to block cars arriving at the fundraiser. But when they did this, some liberals present objected and told the radicals not to block cars, creating an unnecessary and inappropriate tactical argument in front of the police. The liberals did this even though, a few months earlier, they had participated in a related campaign against the same government, which had resorted to civil disobedience and blockades after the government had made it very clear that they would never listen to reason. Here is one simple test to help resolve such conflicts. Did your group call the protest the time and the place? Or are you responding directly to some act by those in power? In the case above, everyone present was there to protest a government fundraiser at a place and time set by the government. The liberals didn't create the event, they were just responding, and so it wasn't up to them to set the rules of engagement. They simply felt entitled to do so because they were middle-class liberals and because there were a lot of them. Of course, radicals in black blocs sometimes do show up at marches that other people have called and organized in order to use militant tactics like property destruction. This is what Starhawk and others were complaining about in the letter we already discussed. If, for example, there is an international summit in town, then many different actions may be happening at the same time using different rules. Separation of time and place help. We'll return to that in a few pages. But if militants want to build movement strength and support for a diversity of tactics, then showing up at an action someone else has organized specifically to break their rules of engagement is not a good way to do it. Respecting autonomy also requires that we consider who is most directly affected by inequality and repression. Imagine I'm coordinating an Indigenous solidarity campaign over a land dispute, and some social justice expert from the Catholic Church comes to me and tells the organizers to use less militant tactics. I'm going to tell them to go buzz off, because the church bears a heavy burden of guilt for stealing the land of Indigenous people and has no business telling anyone how to fight. On the other hand, if an Indigenous person from the disputed land comes to us and asks us to use less militant tactics, I'm going to listen carefully and seriously to what they have to say. Next.
Well, we got about 4 minutes. Should I try to read through this section, or should we just move on?
I guess you could just read for another few minutes if you wanted to. Maybe just read this page.
I'll just read this page. Okay. Build a radical bloc to get influence and advocate for action. The conflict about blocking cars at the conservative fundraiser didn't just happen because of an argument about autonomy and turf. It happened because a lot of militants showed up late and weren't organized as a group. So by the time they started to block vehicles, a number of cars had already driven through. A precedent had been set. As a result, liberals were surprised probably a bit frightened, and reacted reflexively to try to reassert the status quo. Here's how it could have gone smoothly. The militants, hold on. Here's how it could have gone smoothly. The militants show up early in a group of 5 or 10, which is plenty to block a lane of traffic. Perhaps they have a couple of chants or signs ready, or a token item to block the road like an empty barrel. As soon as enough people are present to do it safely, they start blocking incoming vehicles. As new people show up to the protest, they see right away that blocking cars is the thing to do. And if anyone has concerns, the militants de-escalate potential arguments and explain their position in straightforward terms. Quote, we're blocking cars to interfere with a conservative fundraiser because the government uses the money raised to whip up hate against immigrants and to push the criminalization of poor people. Many tactical disagreements could be smoothed out if radicals at an action or in a campaign together joined as a bloc, organized and showed up early, explained their actions simply and in advance, and tried to calm anyone who got scared or upset by more militant tactics. Liberal groups are well organized and well funded. As radicals, we often need better organization to counter the tactical monoculture those groups impose, and a bloc or affinity group is a good way to do this on a small scale. And that is time.
Yep, seems like a good place for us to stop the reading portion and to move on to the discussion portion. So as I usually do, I'm just going to open the floor to anybody who had any thoughts over the passages we read today.
I really like the clarification that he goes into about intersectionality, because I think that when I hear a lot of people talk about it, it seems like they have like this vague idea of what it might be, but they don't really understand it because they haven't actually gone and like it's like they've kind of only understood it through context clues, and haven't actually like looked into what it is at its core. And so, he kind of touches on how sometimes people view it as like, I guess sometimes we call it like the oppression Olympics of like, if you have this and this together, then you're like more oppressed and therefore somehow like higher on some like hierarchy of oppression, and when really it's a way to send out olive branches to get everyone on board with realizing where the common oppressor is, rather than like trying to say, well, your fight is not as important as my fight, so they'll try to like detract from it. I see a lot of people that are like economic reductionists do this with like they don't have any intersectionality most of the time, and I think that seems like that's their understanding of an intersectionality. So I like that he kind of explained it as this is more of a way to connect multiple movements in realizing what the common oppressor is.
Yes, I also really liked the section talking about Earth First and how like the pillaging of the environment is kind of like it's like a core indicative thing that just reflects on the way that like the authoritarian class will like try to pillage through the communities that it does. You don't see those two notions tied together that frequently in like a lot of conversations that I see happening. So I thought that was really cool. I also I was not familiar with the was it deep ecology or whatever that term was that they
Yeah,
used. So
that was the term.
um, so I had never heard that before. But I love the way that this author uses like context to be able to build out way more information about these things that not everyone might be aware of. I was also um, amused a little by whenever he harkened back to Starhawk and her um, demonization of diversity of tactics. Because I was having connectivity problems the last time that part came up, and I don't think I had a chance to mention it. But having read some of her books over the years, it, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where I was going with that point, but I love the way that this is all tying things together.
Yeah, I think that an interesting thing is that it has become a lot more normal in the modern era for us to do cross coalition organizing. But it's still not, I would say, like as robust as it needs to be. I think we've gotten a good start. Like we're further ahead than many previous generations. That's probably what appears to be such an enormous threat to the system. Yeah, but we definitely do still engage in some really unhealthy horizontal hostility, and I think that is one of the big things that's holding us back from forming like much more successful coalitions. I won't go on my long ramble about it, but I think it has something to do with internet culture. I think internet culture has been very harmful in that sense. I also think that a lot of the resentments that get built up in those silos when people are just focusing on their particular issue, they build up resentment for people that aren't in their silos. And then when the time comes where the silos all mix with each other, they all have resentments for each other that they're prepared to air with one another instead of trying to figure out how to work that all out and to kind of also maybe realize like the people who are in the room with you right now are probably maybe not the least likely to have those problems, but way better than the average person in the population. Instead of thinking that way, they're like, well, here's my opportunity. Now I'm going to air all my grievances with this person that we've all been talking about in our echo chamber. And it's kind of unhealthy and it splits coalitions apart that could otherwise be very, very strong. So I think we have a lot of potential in the modern era to kind of explore this intersectional approach. And one thing that I'm really so proud of Cooperation Tulsa for is that kind of we're just like very intersectional at our foundation. So yeah,
You have to agree to it in order to be a member.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't do this thing where we do no kind of reductionism. There's no reductionism in our org, right? We do have maybe an emphasis on the ecology, an emphasis on the land, right? But that is it's not as if that means that that's all we care about. Our members are all not all, but like a lot of our members are involved in a bunch of other organizations dealing with all kinds of other issues. And
I mean, but also we, as an org, directly have our hands in a lot of pots that address a lot of various, I guess, like movements,
right.
you know?
Yeah, well,
We got like trans, assistance, and we've got like, I don't want to talk about it, but
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, we part of the approach that we take is like we try not to do redundancy. So it's like, oh, somebody's already doing mutual aid. Well, maybe we'll do it in a circumstantial sense, but they're already on it. Let's focus on something that people aren't doing, because it takes an ecosystem of approaches. So I think that that's been one of the strengths of our organizing ethos, is not trying to do everything and staying very committed to the actions that we're already focused on, and then expanding that praxis rather than being like, let's try to do everything. I think that it's been super helpful to be like, no, we're going to focus on our thing. We're going to do our thing. And then we're going to be involved with everybody else who's doing their thing.
Yep. I love that about us.
Yeah, but I think that the book's basically talking about that. One thing that I think is interesting is I think that, the book's kind of also talking about, like, there's this risk of building a formal organization that wants to build and build and build, and so doesn't do any sort of like resisting militant action. And I think that could probably be an accurate critique of Cooperation Tulsa. We're not really engaged in militant action. But once again, I think it's because we're looking at things as there's an ecosystem of approaches. So we're not going to stop anybody.
On what your definition of militant action is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in his scale, we're on the half.
If you mean violent action, then no, we're not involved in that.
Right. But even like his scale, like there was like two halves, and we're on the middle right of his militant portion. He says building alternatives is part of militancy, but it's like there's like things that are more militant, but we're not. I think the thing is that we don't step on anybody's toes who's doing any of that stuff. Right. We're not going to go around being like, no, don't do those things. That's bad. That, we're not going to be that entity. Like we value the ecosystem of approaches. But yeah, did anybody else have any other thoughts about the passages we read today?
Well, I think for at least the part I was there for the most time was here at the last section. Was just about how to deal with the different tactics as they come up, different examples. I think especially what's on the page there is like the fact that just be there to explain, like be there first, explain what's going to happen to the people that are going to be there. So it's like informed risk, it's consensual, and I believe we would be surprised, honestly, to see how people would act with that, especially with people's current circumstances at the moment. But I think it is important to be upfront with it so they are not scared or jarred and think that just like trying to rile people up to get the news to send in National Guard or something.
That's something that I've seen a lot, is failure to explain why you're doing what you're doing when it comes to civil disobedience and demonstrations. Like people failing to, it's like they assume that everyone else knows what they know and understands their intentions, instead of having a way to explain why they're there, why they're doing what they're doing, what this is a response to, and what they want the takeaway to be. That it's there's never, it's rarely, like, people don't do that, and they also don't provide like what their demands are. They're just kind of there with this, like, down with this sort of thing mentality, but there's no demands. It's like, you're doing this, but what do you want the outcome to be for this action? And I think that's like it's just, it turns what could be something productive, and it like makes it into like just it's almost like they're just blowing off steam sometimes.
Yep.
Because they're not doing it with any, like, they're not doing it deliberately. They're not doing it with intention. They're just kind of there, and nobody understands what's going on, why they're doing it. From the outside, they're just like, this is just a rowdy bunch of people.
Yeah, I largely agree, especially in my experience dealing with a lot of, like, locally, Tulsa Fights Fascism and the ICE group, although I will say that does much better. in the No Kings. It's just like there's so much potential, but they end up standing on the sidewalk and like having insults like without any actual demands, any targeting, any like they're just standing there making signs, just a social gathering. And that's very frustrating to see. It's like especially people that are like they went through the Vietnam, like they literally were anti-war during that time. I'm like, what are y'all doing? But it's just can't really do much about that. You just got to keep going and try to show by action if they're not going to do it through just ideas.
That feels to me kind of like a real life extension of what you said, Daniel, about internet culture and how that kind of way of going about things has really done a lot of harm to our ability to form coalitions. Um, because everyone on the internet has an opinion and they find their little groups of people that agree with their opinion, and it's so easy to kind of fall into that purity testing mentality. And it's the internet and everyone's allowed to have their opinion, and so that's kind of what happens when you have these like mass internet organized protests is you just have a whole bunch of people out in a space with a sign because they have their opinion. But that's as far as it seems to go.
Yeah. I definitely, it's obviously not something that, that behavior didn't just start with the internet, but I think it got a lot worse with the internet, I think that, we can see this symptom in the example of like when I first got started, marches. I may, this is just maybe my personal experience, but when I first got started, when we would make marches and we organized marches or whatever, they sort of like had a purpose. We were going from one place to another and we were going to end up somewhere that was going to be like notable, a city building, the headquarters of a bank. And then even if we didn't really have any like plan for direct action to change that, there would maybe be some form of civil disobedience that was planned, like a sit down or whatever, right? And you don't even see that these days. Like now they're not even marching for the No King stuff. They're just having these big rallies where everybody kind of stands outside as cars drive by, which is, I'm glad those protests are happening, but it kind of demonstrates the shift that's taking place where it's more about the demonstration of we all have opinions than it is about like, let's demonstrate we have power,
Oh yeah, God, that's another thing. Is like, yeah, it was like we used to always like organize demonstrations outside of like what you were saying, outside of like City Hall or outside of some bank headquarters or something, and it's like now it's just like some random street corner, and it's like okay, um, I'm not telling you not to do that, but I am wondering if you could explain to me what effect you're hoping that would have. And also, like, doing the demonstrations on like a Saturday when nobody's at City Hall and nobody's at the bank headquarters. And like, I just, maybe there's a reason that I just don't understand, and I would be curious to hear it. But I kind of feel like it's just a lack of intention or a lack of thinking through it and just being like, hey, we got bored of sharing our opinions online, so we're going to share our opinions on the street corner. And it's like, okay. And is there something that you want to happen from you sharing that opinion? Well, I think people don't understand like what power really is and what like as this book has talked about throughout all of these sections, basically saying like trying to have a whole political movement based on appealing to someone, appealing to the empathy of the oppressors is kind of a dead end. It's just a waste of energy. that like you have to make the movement happen, you have to make the change happen, and then public opinion will follow. And it's like I see a lot of people doing it kind of backwards, where it's like they don't want to change anything, they want to get people to agree with them.
Yeah, I think the Saturday, like the timing of those is so like indicative of the idea that they don't have like working class solidarity at all, because these people are doing it on a Saturday to maximize people that they think are going to be off, or they themselves are working during the week. So I mean, that's why I feel like they pick Saturdays is
Yeah,
they're
low
trying to get
income
this mass of
people
people.
don't get Saturdays off.
Yeah, but I mean,
Like
in their
everybody has
eyes,
to
they
work
just
Saturdays and Sundays if you're working in like service industry or like low
yeah.
wage.
But
Like
that's what I
those are
mean.
the
Like,
busiest times and nobody gets those days off. But whenever we're talking about like white, affluent or middle class, like well-educated people, and they're thinking about when is everybody off, they're judging based on their own social group.
yeah,
And
completely.
their social group is off on Saturdays and Sundays. But the people who have the most to get from a movement, those folks don't get Saturdays and Sundays off.
Yeah, completely. And I mean, even I would say that those people are probably in the office Monday through Friday. So for them, this is just like a little weekend warrior action. You know, it doesn't, they're not willing to actually disrupt anything that's going on during the week.
Yeah, I mean, literally, that's why the phrase "weekend warrior" exists, isn't it? Like it's kind of precisely the dynamic that's being described there. I also want to note we have about 10 minutes left. So, what are people's closing thoughts on this section?
It's hard to add on to it because he so extensively belabors the point of everything he says. He backs it up with like 18 different examples. And then those examples have footnotes. So sometimes it's hard to follow up with commentary because he said all the things that could be said. We could promote popular education and promote asking people to. I am once again begging for y'all to donate to Cooperation Tulsa so that we can continue growing food and expand our capacity to grow food for our community, considering how food insecure things are getting. I'm very proud of us that we had the foresight to get all of this started before we got to this point. But we absolutely need way more funding to expand these efforts because there are a lot more people that are needing this.
Yeah, I feel like this is a very important time if you have money to become a donor to Cooperation Tulsa, because like, you know, our purpose for trying to develop food sovereignty, this is now the crucial moment for us to be able to deliver, right? And it requires money for us to be able to do the things we need to do. We are obviously trying to get money from a variety of places, but we want for the majority of our income to come from crowdfunding. So I would like to encourage everybody who cares about what Cooperation Tulsa is doing to click through that link there that's in the chat or in the description if you're watching afterwards, and just become a recurring donor to Cooperation Tulsa so that we can rely on crowdfunding rather than having to like write a bunch of grants, because I think everybody kind of knows how writing grants can be sort of a slippery slope. We don't want to engage in the slippery slope. We want to be beholden to y'all.
I'd rather be beholden to the working class community rather than having to like grants always come with strings attached, and those strings almost always serve capitalism, they serve industry, they serve corporations, and generally liberal interests that we're just not in alignment with. And so we depend almost entirely on recurring donations from people anywhere from like $5 to $25. I mean, even $5 a month, that'll buy us like a case of water for our Saturday work days. Also, popular education. I have another education group that's on the opposite Mondays. So this next Monday, we also meet on Jitsi, but I'm not streaming on YouTube. And we watch a video with introductory information, generally like video essays, and then we discuss the subjects of that. And I post the links for that on our social media pages on Twitter and on Instagram, and I post those every Monday.
Yeah. We absolutely want as much participation in these as possible. The popular education one as well. It's super easy to just get that link and to go participate. We're not streaming those just because Theo currently doesn't have the kind of machinery that would allow them to actually do a live stream like I'm doing right now. Like I'm doing this through my computer, and I have a decently nice computer, and I know how to live stream and all that because I do the Anark channel, but Theo doesn't. So if you want to participate in the popular education program, you do have to like get the link and then join the Jitsi meeting. However, as well, just keep in mind, if you want to give us enough money where Theo could also have a really nice setup, where Theo could also do live streaming, wink, wink. You got any whales in the audience? Wink, wink. Anyway, but
it's not even just to live stream. It's also because I do all of the PR and all of the graphics and all of the videos, all the videography, the video editing, but I don't have a computer that is strong enough to have video editing software on it. And so if I had a computer or a laptop that could handle that, that would make things way easier, rather than what I currently do is try to do it on my phone, which takes like days at a time, because of how tedious it is to do all that on a tiny little phone. But yeah, if anybody wants to donate like $1,000 laptop, otherwise I'll just keep doing it on my phone.
Yeah, it's wild to think how much of this you're doing on your phone.
Yep.
A laptop, or if we could build a computer. If you give us enough money, we could build Theo a desktop. That'd be pretty sweet. But we have about 5 minutes left. Anybody else have any thoughts as we kind of draw to a close?
I think everybody should work on their coalition building instead of trying to. I mean, we understand this about social insertion, and like instead of trying to get other people, like instead of just saying, "Hey, you should like join our fight," for us to be going out into the community, which is what we do, going out into the community and participating in their efforts and explaining the need for solidarity and for this coalitions. And like, yeah, unfortunately, if you get really good at coalition building, it puts a target on your head, and if you get too effective at it, you're probably going to be in the crosshairs. And so obviously this book is a good way to learn how to avoid getting the find out. I don't even know how to say it without like triggering any of the censoring, but you know what I mean.
Don't worry, you can say curse words on YouTube. You can't say them within the first 30 seconds.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, I think so. This book is like, obviously he's talking about the importance of coalition building, and that strengthens having multiple movements, not necessarily a big tent movement, but lots of different groups, all coordinating together. And also the information that's in this book can help you figure out how to not get caught, how to not get shot, how to not get shut down, and how to not destroy yourselves from within.
Absolutely. Highly recommend people read this book on their own, even if you're listening through each of these live streams with us. You will probably continue to get things out of it. But yeah, we only have about 3 minutes left. Zan, I saw you unmute there for a second a minute ago. Is there something you wanted to say?
Sure. I meant to say this earlier. I was just away from my computer, but yeah, just a couple things about what we read. From my understanding, intersectionality, as Crenshaw defined it, was to express this like specific experience under intersection of like two oppressions. Like she'd give the example of Black women. It's like it's not just like Black women are victims of misogyny and racism, but like a specific misogynistic racism that's like completely different than just misogyny, just racism. And but I don't know. I think the common understanding of like the intersection of different oppressive systems and thus liberation, resistance, liberation initiatives, and solidarity. I don't know. I think it's a good one, even if I don't think it was meant to be understood that way. And the other thing I was wondering about is like the definition. Like I did hear about deep ecology, how it had been maligned by people who were, like kind of advocating for the famine, because it's like in their head it was weeding out the weak. So nature was weeding out the weak. I don't know. I'm just wondering, and there were like specific names to these people. Like I forget who they were now, but I remember Murray Bookchin talking about it, and I think it was one of the reasons that he came up with social ecology as kind of a response to like the inhumanity of those people and this kind of discourse. But so I kind of forgot we read that part last time, and I was wondering if it was kind of, if the person is suggesting that it didn't happen, or that these people were like plants, or like, I'm not suggesting we should get rid of deep ecology. Like if we just if we get rid of those horrifying discourse, like why not, right? But I'm wondering where the truth lies, right? And
the truth is that those things did happen. That there were notable figures as well that said all of those things that were listed. Right. And that is what caused Murray Bookchin specifically to break from deep ecology. But one thing I will say in defense of deep ecology is none of that's necessary to believe in deep ecology. Like if you go research what deep ecology is, none of that is included in the foundations of its theoretical structure, right? That was like I think just the beliefs of some notable figures within it. Nonetheless, it was enough for Murray Bookchin to distance himself from it and to create social ecology, because in his mind, those things were the results of deep ecology not having well considered the actual role of humans and the unique position that humans hold within the ecology. So social ecology in a very real way was his attempt to create a structure that would never be able to produce such a result, that nobody who could advocate for his position could ever accidentally come to that conclusion. But there's actually a whole book that maybe one day we'll read called Reclaiming Bookchin, which has a really great dialogue on actually this exact split and where it came from. So highly recommend that if anybody's interested on that exact topic about deep ecology and social ecology. But I also just want to say we our overtime. So I think this is a good place for us to end it today. I appreciate everybody coming here to read. I also appreciate everybody showing up in the live stream. That is going to be it for the 7th session of the Organizer Education Group for Cooperation Tulsa. And I'll see everybody next time.
Good night.
See ya.